Part 1. My name's Jake Mitchell, and until recently, I thought I was living the dream. At 35, I had everything I'd ever wanted: a thriving career, good friends, a beautiful wife named Mary, and a cozy house on the edge of town where the streetlights gave everything a golden glow at night. Mary and I met at work. I just landed a senior marketing position at a big firm downtown, the kind of place where ambition seeps from the walls and everyone's too busy climbing the ladder to notice who they're stepping on. Mary was already established there, a project manager with a reputation for getting things done, efficient, sharp-eyed, and about as forgiving as a drill sergeant when deadlines loomed. Our first interaction was more a collision than a meeting. I'd screwed up a presentation by missing a critical detail she'd emailed me about twice. After the meeting, she pulled me aside, her voice low and tight, like she was holding back from chewing me out right there in the hallway. "Jake, right?" she said, her eyes narrowed like she was trying to decide whether I was incompetent or just plain careless. "Next time, read your emails. I don't have time to babysit." I should have been annoyed. Instead, I was intrigued. Something about her intensity, her unapologetic bluntness, hooked me. Most people in the office were too polished, too careful. Mary was direct, borderline ruthless, and I respected that. What started as mutual irritation turned into something else. We ended up working on a high-profile campaign together. Late nights, too much coffee, the kind of pressure that makes you either crack or thrive. Mary thrived. And, despite my rough start, so did I. Somewhere between arguing over ad concepts and celebrating the project's success with drinks at the office bar, a spark caught. The firm had a strict no-dating policy, but we didn't care. It was like trying to bottle a hurricane. We kept things quiet for a while, sneaking out for lunch breaks that lasted longer than they should, catching each other's eye during meetings and sharing little smiles like we had a secret the rest of the world would never understand. Eventually, we decided to come clean, bracing ourselves for the inevitable lecture from HR. Surprisingly, they only made us sign a stack of disclosure forms and moved us to separate teams to avoid conflicts of interest. I think the HR director saw it coming months before we did. Once we were officially allowed to be together, everything moved fast. I proposed 2 years later during a weekend trip to Charleston. It wasn't some extravagant affair, no flash mobs, no hidden photographers, just me, her, and a warm sunset over the harbor. She cried when I pulled out the ring, smacked me in the shoulder for keeping her waiting so long, and then kissed me until my knees almost buckled. Our wedding was small and simple, just close friends and family in a little garden behind an old historic inn. Mary looked incredible in that white dress, no veil, her hair falling loose over her shoulders, smiling at me like I was the only man in the universe. When she said, "I do," I believed her with every fiber of my being. The early years of our marriage were good. Great. Even. We both climbed the ranks at work, pushing each other to be better, stronger, more successful. After a few years, we bought a house, a 2-story Craftsman with a wraparound porch and enough character to feel like a real home. Mary was ambitious, determined to break through the glass ceiling, and I loved that about her. She thrived under pressure, made decisions with the same cold precision she used to cut through my initial incompetence at work. And me? I was right there beside her, building a career of my own and loving her like my life depended on it. We became that power couple people talk about. The ones who show up at corporate events looking polished, confident, untouchable. But at home, things were softer. Mary could be playful, teasing, affectionate. I lived for those moments, her head on my chest while we watched some terrible reality show, her sleepy smile when I brought her coffee in the morning. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. And for a long time, I believed it would always be enough. Part 2. It started small. So small, I almost convinced myself I was imagining it. Mary had always been ambitious, but her drive hit another gear when she got promoted to senior project manager. It was a big deal, more money, more prestige, and a team of her own to command. I was proud of her, of course. Hell, I bragged about her to anyone who'd listen. My wife, the powerhouse. The woman who could run circles around half the men in her field without breaking a sweat. But with the new position came late nights and early mornings. Business trips stretched longer than they used to, and her phone seemed permanently glued to her hand. That wasn't entirely new, she'd always been attached to her work. But now, she guarded her phone like it held nuclear codes. If I reached for it, even as a joke, her eyes would flash with something sharp and unrecognizable. "It's just work stuff, Jake. You wouldn't be interested," she'd say with a dismissive wave, her tone almost condescending. The first real red flag came one night when she was in the shower. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. I glanced at the screen out of habit, expecting to see a work notification or a spam message. Instead, it was a text from someone named Ryan. "Can't stop thinking about you." My stomach twisted, but I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just a joke. Maybe it was one of her coworkers messing around, some off-color attempt at humor I didn't understand. I asked her about it later, keeping my tone casual. "Hey, someone named Ryan texted you earlier." Seemed friendly. She hesitated for a fraction of a second before shrugging. "Oh, Ryan's part of my new team. He's a joker, always sending dumb stuff. I'll tell him to cut it out." It was a reasonable explanation, and because I wanted to believe her, I did. But things kept piling up. Mary's mood shifted like a weather vane in a hurricane. Some days she was affectionate, almost desperately so, clinging to me like she was trying to prove something. Other times, she was distant, distracted, her eyes glossed over even when we were supposed to be spending time together. She started going out more often, always with the same excuse. "Just a quick dinner with the team, Jake. You know how it is. Gotta keep up the morale." I'd nod and play along, pretending it didn't bother me when she came home late, brushing off my attempts at conversation with a tired smile and a mumbled excuse about meetings running over. Pretending I didn't notice her avoiding eye contact when I asked how her night went. Then there were the business trips. They became more frequent, more drawn out. At first, I didn't think much of it. High-level positions meant high-level responsibilities. But one night, as I was scrolling through social media, I saw a photo posted by one of her coworkers. It was taken at some fancy restaurant in New York, all of them raising glasses like they were celebrating something big. Mary was there, her smile bright, her hand resting a little too comfortably on the shoulder of a man I didn't recognize. A man who, I soon found out, was Ryan. I confronted her about it, unable to hide the bitterness in my voice. "You never mentioned Ryan was on that trip with you." Her eyes narrowed, and she crossed her arms like I'd accused her of murder. "He's on my team, Jake." "Of course, he was there." "You're being paranoid." "Am I?" "Yes." "God, you need to stop overthinking everything." "It's just work." I wanted to believe her. Desperately. But every explanation she gave felt like trying to hold water in my hands. The tighter I gripped, the more it slipped through my fingers. The worst part was that I couldn't prove anything. I had nothing but suspicion and the gnawing feeling that the woman I loved was slipping away from me. So, I tried harder. I cooked her favorite meals, planned little weekend getaways, bought her gifts for no reason other than to see her smile. But her smiles came less and less. When they did, they felt forced, like she was going through the motions of a role she no longer wanted to play. And then there were the nights when she'd climb into bed with me, her body rigid and distant. When I reached for her, she'd stiffen, her sigh heavy with irritation. "Jake, I'm tired. Can't we just, not tonight?" It was a broken record, one that played so often I could almost predict the excuses before they left her lips. And I started to feel like I was begging. Like I was some pathetic, needy fool who couldn't see what was right in front of him. But what if I was wrong? What if it was all in my head? That's the thing about doubt. It worms its way into your mind, convincing you that you're either blind or insane. And maybe I was both. So, I kept playing my part, hoping she'd snap out of whatever funk she was in. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. And the worst part? I was too scared to admit it. Part 3. The truth hit me like a freight train. Not a subtle clue or an uneasy feeling, but cold, undeniable proof. Mary had another work trip scheduled, a conference in Chicago that would last 3 days. I tried not to let my paranoia get the best of me, but it was impossible. The inconsistencies, the secrecy, the way she seemed more excited packing her suitcase than she ever did spending time with me. It gnawed at me, tearing little pieces of my sanity away every time she glanced at her phone, and her lips twitched with some hidden amusement. She left on a Thursday morning, planting a quick kiss on my cheek like it was just another day. Her smile was distant, her eyes already somewhere else. "I'll call you tonight," she said, her voice light and casual. "Probably late, but I'll try." "Sure," I replied, forcing a smile. "Have a good trip." But she never made it to Chicago. I found that out the hard way. The day she left, I tried to ignore the burning suspicion clawing at the back of my mind. But by the next morning, it was impossible to focus on anything else. I couldn't work, couldn't think straight. Something felt wrong. The kind of wrong that leaves your stomach twisted in knots. On a whim, I decided to check her social media. It wasn't something I normally did. I respected her privacy, or at least I used to. But desperation makes you do things you never thought you would. Nothing. Her account was quiet. Too quiet. Usually, she'd post something about the conference or at least share a quick photo of the view from her hotel room. But there was nothing. My fingers hovered over my phone, torn between letting it go and diving headfirst into whatever nightmare I suspected was unfolding. Eventually, curiosity won. I called her office. "Hey, it's Jake. Just wanted to confirm something. Mary made it to Chicago, right?" The hesitation on the other end of the line was all the confirmation I needed. Mary? She's not in Chicago. She's been on personal leave for the last couple of days." "Personal leave?" I echoed, my voice cracking. "Are you sure?" "Yes. She put in the request last week." "Is everything all right?" I hung up before I could say something I'd regret. My thoughts were spinning, crashing into one another like cars in a demolition derby. Mary had lied. About the conference. About everything. But where the hell was she? I called her, but it went straight to voicemail. Sent her a text, which was left unread. Panic gave way to anger. The kind of anger that numbs you until all that's left is cold determination. I spent the rest of the day scouring through her social media, her friends' posts, anything that might give me a clue. Then I remembered Ryan, the colleague who always seemed a little too familiar, the one whose name kept cropping up whenever Mary's mood soured. I found his profile easily enough. It was mostly private, but he had recently tagged himself at a new apartment complex across town. Some upscale place with overpriced lofts and a view of the river. I drove there without thinking, my fist clenched around the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. It was reckless, I knew that. But logic had been tossed out the window the moment I found out she'd lied. When I arrived, I parked across the street, my heart hammering so hard I could barely breathe. I had no plan, no idea what I was even looking for. Just a gut feeling that something was horribly wrong. And then I saw her. Mary, stepping out onto the balcony of a fourth-floor apartment, laughing at something. She was wearing casual clothes, her hair tied back in a way she never bothered to do at home. And Ryan was right there with her. They looked comfortable, like they'd done this 100 times before. He handed her a glass of wine, his hand lingering on her waist just a moment too long. My chest tightened, the air around me turning thin and cold. There it was. The proof I'd been trying so hard not to find. I watched them for what felt like hours, my mind a mess of rage, pain, and disbelief. At some point, they moved back inside, closing the balcony door behind them. But I couldn't move, couldn't force myself to leave. I just sat there, staring up at the apartment like it was some kind of twisted monument to betrayal. Eventually, I forced myself to drive home. I don't remember much of the drive, only that my hands were trembling so badly I almost crashed twice. By the time I made it back, something inside me had snapped. All the sadness, all the pain, it was gone, replaced by a cold, focused rage. If Mary wanted to lie to me, betray me, make me out to be a fool, then fine. But I wasn't going to sit back and accept it. She wanted to play games? I'd show her just how dangerous that could be. Part 4. I spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling, my mind churning with thoughts darker than anything I'd ever allowed myself to consider. Anger had carved out a space where all the love I'd once felt for Mary used to be. Cold, calculated fury took its place. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't do anything but plan. Because if there was one thing I'd learned from working in marketing, it was how to strategize. And if Mary wanted to play me for a fool, then I was about to teach her the cruelest lesson of her life. The first step was gathering evidence. I needed proof, not just for me, but for the fallout I intended to rain down on her and Ryan when the time came. I bought a set of high-quality recording devices online. Tiny cameras disguised as mundane objects, a clock, a picture frame, even a pen. Paranoia became my new hobby. I installed the cameras throughout the house, focusing on the living room, kitchen, and especially our bedroom, just in case she ever brought him here. I planted a voice recorder in her car, tucked beneath the driver's seat where it wouldn't be discovered. Another one in her purse, slipped in during one of her distracted mornings before she rushed out the door. Then came her phone. I spent hours figuring out how to install spyware, something that would give me access to her messages, calls, emails, everything she'd tried to keep hidden from me. By the end of it, I felt like some sort of twisted cyberstalker. But I didn't care. She'd made me this way, and I was only getting started. Over the next week, I watched and listened, collecting every piece of evidence I could. The messages were the worst. Mary was careful, of course. She only texted Ryan from her work phone, the one she assumed I couldn't access. But the spyware did its job. Their conversations were sickening, full of inside jokes and private references that made me want to smash my phone against the wall. They made fun of me, called me oblivious, desperate, clueless. Ryan even had the audacity to joke about how easy it was to keep me in the dark. And Mary, she played along, laughing, feeding his ego like it was her favorite pastime. I read those messages until my eyes blurred with rage. Every smile she'd given me over the past few months felt like a cruel parody of the love we once shared. Every kiss a lie. But I kept it together. Because losing control wouldn't help me. If I was going to do this, I needed to be smart. Ruthless. Once I had enough evidence to ruin both of them, I started phase 2 of my plan. Financial warfare. Mary and I shared a joint account, but I had my own private savings. Money I'd been putting aside for years, planning for vacations, upgrades to the house, maybe even starting my own business one day. I moved every cent out of our joint account and into mine. It wasn't illegal. I earned the bulk of our income, and I had every right to keep my own earnings. But I knew it would sting. Mary had grown accustomed to a certain lifestyle, one that I was about to rip away from her without mercy. I also canceled all her credit cards. She'd find out soon enough, but by then, it wouldn't matter. I made sure to document everything. Screenshots of her messages, copies of her phone logs, even the voice recordings of her whispering sweet nothings to Ryan during her drives to and from work. But I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I acted like nothing was wrong. I kissed her goodbye in the mornings, listened to her half-assed excuses when she came home late, pretended to believe her when she said she was just exhausted from work. It wasn't easy. Some nights I felt like I was going to explode from holding it all in. But every day I lasted was another day I gained the upper hand. Ryan was next on my list. The smug bastard who thought he could steal my wife and walk away unscathed. A few phone calls was all it took to find out everything about him. His address, his work schedule, even the names of his past girlfriends, some of whom were more than happy to vent about his cheating, manipulative ways. I contacted his company's HR department anonymously, sending them copies of the explicit messages he'd been exchanging with Mary, along with proof that he was using company resources to carry on their little affair. I knew his employer had a zero-tolerance policy for inappropriate relationships conducted on company time. And from what I gathered, Ryan wasn't exactly indispensable. He'd lose his job. And once he did, I'd make sure every future employer he applied to would get a detailed report of why he was let go. But that wasn't enough. No, I wanted to see the look on Mary's face when her entire world came crashing down. The final step of my plan was the reveal. I rented a conference room at a hotel, the same hotel where she and Ryan had met up more than once. I sent them both invitations, disguised as a corporate event related to Mary's job. When they walked in together, laughing like the world was theirs to conquer, I stepped out from behind the curtain and watched their faces twist from joy to panic. I handed them each a folder filled with everything I'd collected. The texts, the photos, the audio recordings. Proof of their betrayal laid out in excruciating detail. Mary went pale, her hands trembling as she flipped through the pages. Ryan tried to play it off like a misunderstanding, but his voice cracked with fear. I simply walked away, leaving them to unravel the mess they'd created. And I couldn't wait to watch them drown. Part 5. The silence was deafening. After I walked out of that conference room, leaving Mary and Ryan in shambles, I felt nothing. No relief, no satisfaction, just an empty, echoing void where pain had once thrived. It was like standing in the eye of a storm, waiting for the next wave to tear me apart. But the pain never came. Instead, there was clarity. I cut Mary out of my life like a tumor. Filed for divorce the next morning. No drawn-out drama. No chance for her to spew apologies or beg for forgiveness. I made sure the papers were delivered straight to her desk at work. The look on her face when she opened them? Priceless. A pale, shattered expression that told me she finally understood there was no coming back from this. She called me that night, her voice cracked and desperate. I didn't pick up. She left messages, pleading, crying, accusing. The full cycle of a narcissist trying to reclaim control. Apologizing 1 minute, then screaming the next, like somehow I was the one who had betrayed her. I deleted every single voicemail without listening past the first sobbing word. My lawyer was efficient, relentless, and worth every penny. The evidence I'd gathered made the proceedings brutal for her. I kept the house, my assets, my dignity. She left with nothing but her clothes and whatever self-respect she could scrape together from the wreckage. Ryan's life fell apart just as beautifully. His company fired him before the ink even dried on the HR report. His reputation obliterated, his career prospects shriveled to dust. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that his girlfriend left him, too. She'd seen the evidence I provided and didn't hesitate to walk out of his life forever. Two homewreckers, stranded in the wreckage they built. Poetic justice. But my revenge didn't stop there. Oh, no. I wanted to erase every trace of her from my life. I sold the house, packed up everything that reminded me of her, and tossed it into a dumpster like yesterday's trash. Even the things I once cherished, if they had any connection to her, they were gone. I relocated to a sleek apartment downtown, nothing fancy, but modern and clean. A fresh start, miles away from the ghosts of my old life. And then I focused on myself. Physically, mentally. I poured all my anger, all my hatred, into becoming the best version of myself. I hit the gym like a man possessed, shedding the pounds I'd gained during years of comfort and apathy. Turned fat into muscle, weakness into strength. Therapy helped, too. Not the kind where you sit and wallow in your misery. No, the kind where you tear down your mind and rebuild it from the ground up. The kind where you learn to weaponize your pain instead of drowning in it. The man I became over those months was someone I barely recognized. And I loved it. I threw myself into my work with the same fury I'd once reserved for vengeance. Promotions came quicker than ever, my reputation soaring as I turned my rage into productivity. While Mary and Ryan were left floundering in the ruins of their own making, I thrived. Every so often, I'd get a text or an email from Mary. Apologies, mostly. Attempts to explain herself, to convince me that she'd made a mistake and wanted to fix things. I never replied. My silence was her punishment. Eventually, she showed up at my office. She looked different. Haggard. Worn down. Like her betrayal had turned her into the worst version of herself. "Jake, can we talk?" she asked, her voice trembling like a leaf in a storm. "No. Please, No," I cut her off, my tone cold and unyielding. "You don't get to ask me for anything. You lost that right the second you decided to throw everything away for some cheap thrill." Her eyes filled with tears, but I felt nothing. Not anger, not sorrow, not pity. She was nothing to me. "Jake, I know I hurt you. I know I ruined everything. But can't we just leave?" I snapped. "You're a stranger to me. Less than that. You're a parasite trying to crawl back into a life you don't deserve." She left, sobbing, and I went back to work without sparing her another thought. I didn't just rebuild my life. I upgraded it. Surrounded myself with people who valued me, respected me, made new friends, reconnected with old ones. I traveled, experienced things I'd always put off while I was busy playing the dutiful husband. It's amazing how much better life becomes when you cut out the rot. One day, while sitting in a rooftop bar overlooking the city, I realized I hadn't thought about Mary in weeks. The rage that had once consumed me was gone. I wasn't healed, maybe I never would be, but I was stronger, sharper, happier. I took a sip of my drink, feeling the warmth spread through me. The man I used to be was dead, and I wasn't mourning his loss. Mary had broken me, but in the end, all she'd done was make me unstoppable, and I would never, ever look back. The end.